remember a time in my life where I'd been asking God for something for very long, and I remember the moment that I received the answer. I remember the service where hands were laid on me. I remember the prayers that were prayed over me and the words that were spoken over me and the healing that I received that night. You know, and I could have not showed up. I could have not went to that service. It was an hour away from home. Work days had been long. I was emotional. There were a lot of things going on in my life, but I knew that's where I needed to be. I knew there were special services, there were special revivals, and I knew I needed to be there. And my pastor had asked for us to come. So we knew that that's where God wanted us to be. We simply showed up.
Hi everybody, it's Pete and Sean, and we're doing things a little different today. We had a short week on our Study Land 5 lessons, so God laid something on our heart and we wanted to share it with you. The last blog we wrote on our website was God can't move unless we show up. And we're going to talk to you about that today. Sean has already begun the discussion, but one of the things we want to do is lay some scriptural foundation for it. And we want to talk about one of the most famous stories in the Bible ever, right? David and Goliath. That's an instance of an individual who simply was in the right place at the right time. He showed up when God needed him to show up. We know that David comes to the camp to bring supplies to his brothers. Goliath has the whole Israelite army trembling in fear for several days, threatening them, and no one's willing to stand up to him. Then David comes along. He hears this. He's in the right place at the right time. He's there. He showed up. God tells him, go fight the giant. David goes before the giant, and we know that he says, the battle is not mine, but it's the Lord's. He put it in God's hands. He allowed God to work through him, and obviously was given a great victory. Now, we know later on in David's life, there was a time when it says the kings were going to war, and David decided he wasn't going to go to war. He was going to stay home, and he didn't show up. Right? He didn't show up where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be in battle, leading the army. He stayed home in the palace, ended up getting caught up in adultery and murder of Uriah. And the whole nation of Israel was punished, and he lost his son too as well. So two very different instances from the same person. Once David showed up, was willing to be used of God. Once he didn't show up, and he got punished by God.
That's right. A lot of people got punished because of the actions. You know, could the American church find its place now as a church that just simply doesn't show up? A church that expects a lot of God, but doesn't live up to God's expectations of them as far as committing their ways to the Lord, making Him a priority, having discipleship in their lives, or worshiping, or making times where you can gather together as a congregation of believers, making that priority in our lives. Do we simply not show up? You know, I think about, and I've thought about this week, you know, what if I didn't show up that night? What if me and Pete didn't make the sacrifice to go to that conference and those revival services? What if we didn't have those encounters with God? Would we have received the promise and the healing that we received during those services?
You know, it's just a generation ago, and the American church, and we're talking about the church, you didn't have to question whether they were going to be at church on Sunday. You knew a Christian was going to church on Sunday, right? You didn't have to question whether they were studying and reading the Bible at home, right? Every Christian knew that was a responsibility to study and read the Bible at home. You didn't have to question whether they were praying at home together as a family. You knew that as a Christian, as a family, you prayed together, right? You did this on a daily basis together. But, you know, we're removed a generation from that, and now, like Shauna says, the church has stopped showing up, right? We're committed to the things of this world, but not to the things of God. We'll show up to Little League practice. We'll show up to cheer practice. We'll show up for our hobbies. We'll go fishing. We'll go hunting. We'll show up to work, but we don't show up for the things of God, right? If we don't show up, how can God use us, right? And that's where we find ourselves at as an American church. We've stopped showing up.
Right, and we stopped showing up to revival service. We stopped showing up to community outreach. We stopped showing up to mission trips or in the offering plate. We stopped showing up We see the church as a whole becoming weak, and that's never what God intended us to be. We long for a spirit of revival, a time where we show up and then God shows up and He shows off, because usually that's what happens. When we come and we gather together in one mind, in one accord, like the Bible says, then the Spirit of the Lord is strong and the presence of God is there. And that's where we find peace, we find deliverance, we find healing, we find comfort, and we find strength. And that's exactly the purpose of coming together. That's the purpose of following and pursuing after God, because we are empowered by His presence.
Right. So we want to end this just by asking you, where are you at in your life, right, in your Christian walk? Are you showing up every day? Are you available to God? God, use me. Here I am. Send me. Or are you in a situation where you show up occasionally? Or maybe you're in a spot to where you've just totally stopped showing up. But today is the day to examine your heart. We ask you, search deep. Are you living the life that God has called you to live? Are you available to the Lord, right? When the God says, I need someone, are you that person? Ask yourself.
I believe God has every miracle that you are asking for. He's got every answer to every prayer. And sometimes He's just simply asking you to show up. He's saying, you know what? I've got it ready for you. I just need you to be committed. Until next time, God bless.